Thanks everyone, and thank you very much for coming along to this evening's Institute of Historical Research, Transport and Mobility History seminar, the last in this calendar year's season. My name is Mike Asbest. I'm one of the seminar co-conveners. We've got Charlotte Matheson on technology this evening, and Lewis and David in the room here with us, although you at home won't be able to see apart from through the owl. Just a reminder that previous seminars in a series have been recorded in the main and are available to watch, if you haven't seen already, on the Institute of Historical Research's YouTube channel. The next seminar in the series will be on Thursday, the 16th of January. It will be a virtual session, a series of lightning presentations from some of the final cohort of the University of York MA in Railway Studies programme. We're sorting out the booking arrangements and information for that, so that will follow in due course. However, this evening I'm very pleased to have with us and to introduce Arthur Émile, PhD student at the Laboratory for the History of Science and Technology at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland. He's working, I'm going to say this now, I hope this is fair to say, he's heading into the final stages of his PhD.
Yeah.
Yes, good. Right. Without any pressure. Which is a comparative project looking at Britain and France and thinking about air pollution by steam trains. Arthur and I had a bit of a chat earlier, and it's a really interesting project combining environmental history, history of technology, obviously history of railways, history of mobility, history of labour. There's all sorts of sub-bits of history in there over quite a long duration. So I think you said you were looking at really from the start of steam traction through to the end, broadly.
Basically.
Yeah. So there's lots to come in the wider project. Arthur is currently based in the UK, undertaking some of the UK research up at Leeds Beckett University, and has come down from Leeds today, mostly okay on the trains.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, good. And we'll be speaking tonight to the title, A Familiar Source of Air Pollution, Steam Trains and Movement of Smoke Abatement in Britain in the 1860s through to the 1960s. Arthur, back to you.
Thank you, Mike, and well, hello to everyone. So I'm really pleased to be here, so I can share some of the research I was able to conduct during my mobility stay here in Britain. So I will present today something which is not really a paper, but more like a problematized overview of one aspect of my research, which is on changing perceptions of locomotive smoke at a time of growing concern about urban air pollution. And before that, I will start with a short historiographical comment and a brief presentation of the research project. And here we go. So we have 45 minutes. That's it.
Perfect.
Right, perfect. Yes. So one objective of the study is to connect the history of railways with environmental history and more specifically the history of air pollution, with two questions. In what ways did locomotive smoke influence the material and cultural development of the railways, and what role do the railways play in the history of air pollution? So in previous works in France or Britain, the problem of this problem of air pollution from steam trains operations has been often presented as a local issue. And more generally, I feel like it was dismissed as secondary to the positive impacts of railways on society. I will briefly quote Jack Simmons, for who such drawbacks were undeniable, but were, however, much less important than the contribution the railways greatly made to the improvement of health in the whole community. And as such, there should not be, this kind of drawbacks should not be overemphasized. So in short, air pollution was presented as a social cost for greater benefits. And it also seems to me that it did not fit in a positive approach to railway history. So what I'm trying to do here is just to bring a new perspective on this locomotive smoke, focusing on failure in dealing with social and environmental costs. And among other things, the research aims to historicize the railways as an environmentally friendly means of transport. So to do so, I'm comparing two systems and countries, the systems, with different cultures and relations to coal fuel, steam technology, and air pollution. Though connected and interacting in many ways. So as we all know, Britain saw coal as the main source of its economic and imperial power. It was a cradle of coal-based technology and invented air pollution as a concept. It was also more densely industrialized and urbanized than France at the time considered. So it could be assumed then that the question of railway smoke and its abatement was perceived and managed in different ways on either side of the channel. However, I find it more like variations on the same theme. And one main difference, though, is the existence of a stronger and more structured movement for smoke abatement in 20th century Britain. And I will focus today on Britain for this reason and because of this opportunity to discuss with British historians or specialists of British history. So I will proceed. So this is kind of the main themes explored in my PhD. So there's one missing about knowledge and expertise related to the pictures I displayed. And this is, yeah, so I'm considering locomotive smoke from different angles, perspectives, which are here. And today I will focus on air pollution and smoke abatement in the urban space. So I will proceed in chronological order with 4 sequences presenting the main changes in the framing of this specific issue, as well as different categories of players demanding railway smoke abatement. To begin with, I will give some context to the origins of railway smoke as a local nuisance in the 19th century. I will then focus more extensively on the first half of the 20th century, which saw the first studies on urban air pollution and the more pressing social demand for smoke abatement. For the railways, this period represented a peak in terms of material development and a golden age for steam locomotive technology, but it was also a more difficult time in terms of the stable availability of suitable fuels at a reasonable cost, among other things. And it is argued that the coal question, which is also a part of the dissertation, was not the only issue challenging the future of steam traction in the 20th century. There was also the smoke question. And while smoke abatement may have played a secondary role, but a role nonetheless in the debates leading to the diesel electrification of the railways, it played a more important role in promoting it and leading eventually to the invention of a clean means of transport. So here we go. So locomotive smoke, which is quite common knowledge among railway historians, was a subject of concern since the early days of steam traction. And this is why it was required as early as 1826 for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and more generally after 1845, that locomotive engines, if using coal, shall be constructed on the principle of consuming and so as to consume their own smoke. The absence of smoke was also the first condition specified for the trials in Wren Hill in 1829, which saw the victory of Stephenson's rocket. The main objective, I believe, was to ensure the social acceptance of steam traction and secure the development of steam-operated railways. And I think the date and the place is not irrelevant, because at that time, coal smoke was already identified as an issue in the urban context, especially in cities such as Manchester and Liverpool. And the nation's railway system could benefit or suffer from the experience of industrial nuisance. It was, I believe, the first industrial sector to be regulated regarding smoke emission. So as there was no technical solution at the time to meet this legal requirement, coke became the legal fuel. So as you may know, coke is a manufactured fuel from coal. The process, as you can see, the process of cooking in ovens is an extremely polluting one, but once obtained, coke is considered rather smokeless. And for a time, railway pollution was externalized and concentrated in these ovens, at least partly, as it was later in coal-fired power stations. A problem with coke is that it is, that goes without saying, more expensive than coal, being a manufactured fuel. And the general cost of coal increased a lot in the middle of the 19th century, mostly because of the industrial demand, also because of the rise in mining wages. And furthermore, fuel was one of the main operating costs for railway companies, just short of labor, and they were looking to increase their profit margins because that's what companies do. So this context stimulated innovation, and several attempts were made to design efficient coal-burning locomotives able to burn coal while complying somewhat to the legal requirements. And as the newly designed engines were able to reduce somewhat the emission of smoke, there was a general tolerance from the authorities, and the railways all switched from coke burning to coal burning from the late 1850s, starting with freight engines, then passenger engines. And by the mid-1870s, the use of coke on the railways had been virtually abandoned. It's not always the case, but I'm generalizing a bit on this part. And with coal burning, the smoke nuisance came to the railways and to many people under their influence. And though the surge of complaints from residents and travelers around 1860 has, of course, a broader context than this fuel question on the railways, with growing concern about dirt and urban fog in populated areas with considerations to health. Residents started to denounce the use of coal as a fuel, such as here in Chalk Farm, London, with grievances sharing a common language with other conflicts about industrial smoke. So here they complain about the soot leaving their walls, windows, clothes, furniture, and gardens dirty. This is quite common. And it was also a sensory shock. I think this is important to mention because the same happens with diesel in the 20th century, with a new unpleasant smell. This one, coal smoke, smells of sulfur. So people are inconvenienced by the smell as well. And this was not only perceived as detrimental to comfort, but or property value, but also to health. Such as in the case of chalk farms, residents sometimes form temporary collectives representing neighborhood communities defined by a common experience of railway nuisance. So what could they do at the time? They could, such as in this case, they could complain to the railway company without much success. They could complain to the local authority, but no authority had any power over the railways at that time, no local authority. Or they could prosecute themselves, but the companies were shielded by statutory authority. And since they used smoke-consuming devices, the plaintiffs had to prove negligence in operating engines and face the expertise of railway engineers in court. Furthermore, from 1868 onward, it was only required for locomotive engines, as for other industrial boilers, to consume their own smoke as far as practicable. So a main consequence of coal burning is that by the end of the 19th century, steam locomotives were perceived as contributing somewhat to the urban smoke problem. So railways forming, as we all know, and influencing also an important part of the urban fabric. So all centers of populations were affected in one way or another, as it obviously depended on the presence and size of stations, marshalling yards, works, engine sheds, open cuttings, and tunnel ventilation shafts, all spilling over into the neighborhood. The most obvious symptom of this influence was the soot and the pools of smoke characterizing railway districts. And also grime was a common feature of industrial towns. Railway smoke was emitted at ground level, so it has a tendency to stagnate. So it's quite different from other types of industrial smoke. And contrary to the premise that the proximity of the railways would increase property value, it seemed to have had quite the opposite effect in the age of coal burning and when it comes to dwellings, and except, of course, for slum clearances. Before the First World War, however, the problem did not attract much attention from anyone but residents, local newspapers, and councils. Railway smoke was generally perceived as a local problem, although an intractable one given the operational constraints of driving or lighting engines. With few powers to prosecute, low chances of success, and the parliament sympathetic to the railways, let's say, it seems that residents and local authorities had almost no choice but to endure the nuisance. So the exception is the London County Council, who obtained powers to prosecute the railways at the very end of the century, bringing more than 1,300 legal actions against railway companies between 1899 and 1914, obtaining some temporary improvements before the war. So local councils had obviously more powers over the local railways and tramways they authorized, owned, or operated. And the way to prevent more railway smoke was to ban ordinary steam from these local lines and demand or adopt smokeless fuels or smokeless means of traction. So here are a few examples of the different systems that coexisted for decades, such as compressed air, fireless locomotives, condensed steam, and electric means of traction, of course. Or to having the advantage to ensure better environmental integration into the city for different reasons, such as the comfort of passengers on underground railways especially, and the coexistence with horses in the streets. And why am I talking about tramways now? I'd say that the first demands for the demise of steam were fueled by the experience of these alternative means of traction, who made cleanliness an advantage in competition. At the turn of the 20th century, electricity became, among these different means of traction, electricity became the leading figure of a new imaginary of modernity, and the steam locomotive began to be presented by a few as old-fashioned, archaic even. The debates around the use of electric traction led to demands for the electrification of all urban railways as early as the 1890s. Smoke abatement was one of the arguments supporting this idea in the name of health, cleanliness, and aesthetics, at a time when more and more local councils were given powers and decided to act over smoke pollution. From the late 1920s, this argument extended to main lines, which has to do with a new change in attitudes towards railway smoke. So in the interwar period, except for a few companies pursuing electrification or burning oil on a small scale, smoke conflicts with local authorities and residents intensified, and relations became particularly poor for various reasons, including a peak in locomotive numbers, more powerful engines with high fuel consumption, but above all, a gradual decline, I'd say, in the quality of the coal used. So, of course, the companies were always interested in making the most out of their connections with local collieries and to find the closest and the cheapest suitable fuel for their engines. But the price factor tended to outweigh the quality factor, especially when it came to freight or shunting engines. After the First World War and the strikes of the 1920s, as money went tight and steam coal scarce, companies had to burn lower quality fuels for a time, and this represented an opportunity to reduce costs in the longer term, meaning they would not always return to the previous fuel policy. This created new sensory shocks and a new surge of complaints from residents at that time, supported by local authorities who tried to act over all different sources of coal smoke. But the Public Health Acts did not include steam locomotives on the ground that regulation already existed, and that the problem was intractable as far as steam traction was concerned. So far, the railways had successfully resisted residents and local authorities demanding solutions. By the end of the 1930s, however, railway smoke began to be more often presented as a major contributor to urban air pollution. This was the case in Liverpool, for instance. So I have several case studies, and Liverpool is one of them. So the urban densification was another factor in the deterioration of relations, as local councils had to face railway smoke when building new housing estates close to railway property. And the situation was deemed particularly difficult in Liverpool, with the presence of open cuttings and tunnels with ventilation shafts on the section from Liverpool Lime Street to Edge Hill, run by more than 800 trains daily, not counting shunting. So already causing difficulties to workers, residents, and travelers, railway smoke spilled over newly built corporation flats, threatening the development of areas surrounding the lines. So you would find also complaints from the University of Liverpool at that time, and from the works on the new cathedral as well. So in 1936, facing an increasing number of complaints and difficulties in town planning, the Liverpool Council decided to put pressure on the London, Midland and Scottish Railway on the ground that the unenviable reputation which Liverpool has gained in the matter of air pollution has been largely attributed to the quantity of smoke emitted from railway locomotives, and that it was becoming increasingly detrimental to public health, as well as causing deterioration to buildings to the detriment of property value. So they were directly interested, of course, now that they were owners of buildings in the vicinity of railway lines. So the case is typical of how railway companies dealt with local authorities at the time, showing goodwill while successfully playing for time. The main feature of this strategy was to engage in experiments. In 1936, the LMS accepted to try new methods in firing engines, and it was agreed to measure pollution near the main tunnel, so the Lime Street tunnel, so they could compare the situation before and after the introduction of changes in the methods of firing. From 1936 to 1939, the company tried different kinds of fuels, only to find out that using coal of a better quality was improving conditions. But unfortunately, this solution was presented as too expensive, and after 3 years of experiments, the company managed to avoid any change. Liverpool was already complaining about railway smoke in the 1860s, but the difference is that by the 1930s, local councils were not alone anymore, so to speak. There was a growing social demand for smoke abatement, and a change in the way the problem posed by steam locomotives was framed in this respect. And the main reason for this was the activity of smoke abatement organizations producing knowledge on air pollution and taking a late interest in railway smoke. So in the UK, you will find smoke abatement organizations, so to speak, in the 19th century. But in the beginning of the early 20th century, the more structured movement for smoke abatement took shape, with local and national societies trying to influence energy use and public policies. These players did not pay much attention to the railways at first. The focus was made on more obviously productive industrial sources, then on domestic sources believed to represent the bulk of the smoke emitted and causing the formation of smokes. During the 1930s, however, the National Smoke Abatement Society, its activity led to greater recognition of the railway smoke problem following complaints from many local councils, such as Liverpool. And after surveying local authorities, it had to state the obvious. It cannot be doubted that smoke from railways forms an important proportion of the general smoke nuisance of our towns and densely populated areas. It failed, the problem, it failed to provide any data, and to put a real pressure on railway companies. So the strategy was more to engage dialogue with the railway companies, dialogue which continued in the following decades. So the subject of railway smoke was raised in several conferences organized by the society after the war. In 1945, with few organization, which I forgot the name of the organization, 1950 and 1954. The British Transport Commission and the newly nationalized British Railways, established around 1947 and 1948, became members of the society at the time, and its local branches as well, to keep an eye on what was being said about the railways. They also made a few interventions which attracted substantial attention in those conferences. While recognizing the problem, they classically tried to minimize its magnitude and its responsibility. So they would accuse all the sources, they would praise the improved efficiency of the engines, the new training of the workers, and reinforced discipline. All of this while facing adverse conditions, which was true, such as a shortage of suitable fuels and skilled labor. British Railways insisted on the complex nature of railway operations with a host of technical details, so again, monopoly and expertise since the 1860s. And until the 1954 conference, it was quite successful in resisting the acknowledgement of railway smoke as a major contributor to urban air pollution. What changed was, of course, was a traumatic event that you all are familiar with, I believe, the Great London Smog of 1952, which killed thousands. And in the aftermath of the disaster, a strong response was expected from the government, who appointed a special air pollution committee in charge of investigating the causes of the tragedy and make recommendations. The Clean Air Act of 1956 was partly based on the work of this air pollution committee and the lobbying of the National Smoke Abatement Society, renamed National Society for Clean Air. And what the committee found, based on coal consumption and boiler efficiency estimates, is that rail transport was responsible for 1/7 of all the smoke, 1/5 of all the grit, and 1/10 of all the sulfur dioxide discharged into the British atmosphere, most of it coming from engine sheds and marshalling yards. The steam locomotive was described as an inefficient engine compared to common industrial boilers, while it was one of the greatest coal users in the country, accounting for 15% of domestic consumption at least from the 1920s onwards. It appeared it was not only one of the main victims of smog because of the disturbances in traffic, but also one of its main sources. So these estimates, which are just estimates, and it's not my place to judge if it's solid data. They don't really detail how they measure it, but it had an impact on the perception of railway smoke, obviously. So these estimates almost came as a surprise, except to some engineers who knew locomotives wasted huge amounts of precious British coal. To the public, high chimneys were more obvious culprits, and it was commonly accepted among policymakers that the main source of air pollution was domestic fires. Moreover, taken individually, the thousands of locomotives dispersed across Britain seemed rather harmless. It had been a familiar sight and an almost natural feature of the engine for over a century. So kind of a hidden in plain sight case, except for residents, obviously. So in the span of a few years, from a local nuisance, railway smoke becomes identified as a major contributor to urban air pollution and is finally framed, as you can see here, as a national issue. So it was also with a new framing of the air pollution problem, as you As I mentioned, the Air Pollution Committee's report mentioned the British atmosphere. The invention of the British atmosphere is quite interesting, I think. So the Air Pollution Committee's report had some consequences for British railways. The first is that it legitimized the complaints and conflicts involving residents and local authorities who had been fighting railway smoke for decades. So here are a few examples of how health officers and railway neighbors fought back by insisting on the fact that a nationalized industry accounting for such a large proportion of the pollution emitted should set an example, especially as the authorities tried to impose new constraints on residents at the time, such as the establishment of smokeless zones or smoke control areas where the burning of bituminous coal was prohibited. And this was particularly the case for people living near engine sheds, where most of railway pollution was emitted due to the lighting and preparation of many locomotives. So another case study that I won't detail today is Edinburgh, the St. Margaret Power Depot. There's also a case study in Gateshead and one in London. The second consequence is that the National Society for Clean Air could point a finger at railway culprits based on official figures. So they had data. Smoking locomotives started to appear in charts, pictures, and short movies produced by the Society alongside long-established sources of air pollution. First prize goes to British Railway, claims a propaganda leaflet in which you can read that, taken ton for ton, the railways are the greatest polluters of the atmosphere in Britain. So this is a complete change of positioning from the National Society for Clean Air towards railway smoke. They stopped trying to cooperate with railway companies and try to put some pressure on them by pointing a finger at them through different kind of medias. So the railways were included in the Clean Air Act in 1956, but this act had many intended loopholes. So, for example, the railways were given an exemption regarding grit and dust emission. As to dark smoke, the act applied to locomotive engines as it applied to buildings. And the owners of locomotive engines had to use any practicable means, but it was still difficult to enforce because railways were excluded from smoke control areas. So it means that they were still out of reach from local authorities who tried to enforce the act, except for London. And even in London, the Clean Air Act was never a real threat. Railway smoke inspectors were appointed to engine sheds by the British Transport Commission, but their job was more to keep an eye on the local smoke inspectors and make sure the engines did not emit black smoke when they turned up. So quite classic to many industrial sectors. So in the absence of powers and of binding legislation, the local authorities and smoke abatement organizations had still no choice but to seek cooperation with British Railways to mixed results at best. And the reason is that the government did not want to jeopardize British Railways' efforts to modernize, as the Air Pollution Committee's report supported diesel electrification. There were many reasons for the demise of steam traction, and smoke abatement was one of them. As early as 1931, a technical committee on mainland electrification took social aspects into account, social benefits, mentioning smoke abatement as an important benefit for neighbors and travelers. And it is argued that the great smog had an influence on the shape and the pace of the modernization plan. So in 1955, following recommendations from both the Air Pollution Committee as the Committee on National Policy for the Use of Fuel and Power Resources, as well, of course, as its own agenda, the British Transport Commission presented its plan to modernize British railways. The main feature was the replacement of all steam locomotives with diesel and electric engines within about 15 years. And even if the plan was redesigned several times, the demise of steam remained its main feature as it was expected to reduce operation costs in labor, fuel, and maintenance, but also to attract travelers close to road transport. And smoke abatement was presented as a means to increase attractiveness. And it is argued that it would not have been the case, at least up to this magnitude, without the existence of a strong social demand for clean air, hence of a smoke abatement movement. However, to succeed, the British Transport Commission felt it had to contend with a general goodwill towards the steam locomotive. To a certain degree, the affection for steam trains was widespread, still, I guess, widespread in British society. As an engineer wrote, the puff-puff is the first piece of mechanism in which nearly every child is encouraged to be interested, and towards which an almost emotional attachment commonly arises. Another point made by commentators at the time was that steam trains were a national characteristic, a source of national pride. And finally, the engine was naturalized and romanticized as an essential element of the British scene and landscape. I don't have the time here, but we could quote John Benjamin, for instance. So this sentiment towards steam trains was of great importance, railway officials believed. To compete with road transport on its fast expanding mythology and appeal, they had to convert the masses to the charms of diesel and electricity. So they had to maintain pride and wonder. To face these difficulties, the British Transport Commission adopted a public relations strategy in which smoke abatement, among other things, played a role as a direct and tangible benefit of railway modernization. And British Railways was now presenting itself as a champion for clean transport and clean air. So for instance, you would find them at the National Society for Clean Air exhibition, Jubilees exhibition in 1959 to display the efforts made towards a cleaner atmosphere. And such was the case also in France around 1960. So I will give an example of this public relations strategy. It's a short extract of a film produced in 1959 by the Rank organization in collaboration with the British Transport Commission to promote the modernization plan. It is entitled Letting Off Steam, and it is part of a series of short films broadcasted in movie theaters called the Look at Life series. So I hope you will, I'm not sure they will hear.
Let's give it a go.
I can do the lines because there only are 2 or 3 lines. I remember them, but tell me if you hear something.
Away with this. It's a housewife living near a local depot. This was a short farm incident who has views on the changeover from the smoking.
When it can't come too soon for me, we get so much smoke, no doubt.
Sorry. I think that, yes, my mic was on, obviously. So with this video, I am closing the loop, going back to Shore Farm, in London. The woman you have just seen was a member of the Shore Farm Tenants and Residents Association. She was chosen to appear in the movie to denounce the evils of railway smoke, even though she appears more as a support of the modernization plan. As we have seen, the whole district suffered from railway smoke as far back as 1860, but most of the conflict took place actually after the modernization plan was announced and started to be implemented between 1955 and 1961. In those years, the Shore Farm Tenants and Residents Association waged what has been called a little war on railway smoke, supported by local councillors, MPs, and top scientists such as the meteorologist Richard Scorer and the physician Horace Jules. Residents appeared on several local TV and radio shows and in local newspapers, among many and sometimes more original actions such as this Christmas present to the Minister of Transport, if you can see. They demanded a priority in electrification and dieselization schemes, the use of smokeless fuels for lighting engines, and the building of a high chimney over the shed, among other things. They also installed smoke meters with the support of the London County Council, and over the years, they denied any improvement of the situation, denouncing empty promises from the British Transport Commission. So the story of locomotive smoke, as I said earlier, it's a story of failure, at least of failure to resolve conflicts. And this case study shows that the promise of diesel electrification did not immediately put an end to conflicts with residents. In fact, it's accentuated some. The reason was double. First, diesel electrification was a long process, of course, so it created frustration among the districts that were not served first, such as here in Chalk Farm. Although the British Transport Commission made efforts in communicating its progress with residents via liaison officers. The other reason is that the British Transport Commission stopped investing in steam operations, its energy and money being almost entirely devoted to the modernization plan. So at best, it would engage in experiments, again, such as in this case, playing for time until the demise of steam. So I will now conclude. While local fights and the activity of smoke abatement players appear at first sight to have had few direct and lasting consequences, they at least made the locomotive smoke problem visible, discussed, and contributed to produce knowledge on a familiar, overlooked source of air pollution. In the case of Britain, it is argued that there was a convergence between the desire to modernize the railways and a political and social demand for clean air. In a timely manner, the long-term activity of smoke abatement players and this general movement for clean air provided British Railways with a weapon to promote diesel electrification and positively frame the passing of the steam locomotive. This was much needed as reactions were often ambiguous. Though finally established as an important source of air pollution, despite initial perception bias, it was still a source of pride, wonder, and of rising nostalgia for many, with its loss coming at a time of perceived national decline. Consequently, it is argued that the smoke abatement played a role in promoting the modernization plan to taxpayers and potential users in a context of competition with road transport. So again, cleanliness as a way to compete with other means of transport. To the point, one may consider the late 1950s as a turning point in the imaginary of the railways, newly promoted as a clean and one could almost say environmentally friendly means of transport. So today, railway air pollution remains a problem to be solved in many parts of Britain, I believe. I could experience it because of diesel traction. While coal smoke appears as an asset for many heritage railway lines proposing to recreate the sensory experience of steam. And this smoke, which is sometimes presented as steam, generally conveys a positive image and fails to remind tourists and enthusiasts of the conflicts it created, or the role it played in the development of the railways and in the history of air pollution. Contrary to steam, smoke has no heritage or memory, even if it still causes conflicts. And I was the other day I was visiting the Middleton Railway in Leeds, and I had a chat with one of the volunteers telling me that they still had some complaints from residents, such as in France, and this is the reason why they put this sign at the end of the platform. So I will stop here so we can have some time for the discussion. And if we don't, or if we want to reach out, this is my email address. You can directly write to me if you want.
Brilliant. Thanks, Arthur.